On August 28, 2024, police were dispatched to a quiet residential street in St. James, Long Island, after reports of a shooting inside a single-family home. By the time officers arrived, 2 people were dead inside the residence and outside the house. A teenage girl had been waiting alone in a car. She was not a bystander, but the daughter of the man accused of carrying out the killings, and according to prosecutors, she had been told to wait there by her father moments before he went inside. The victims were Kelly Coppola, age 50, and her boyfriend Kenneth Pohlman Jr., age 53. Both were shot and killed inside the home they shared. What investigators would soon uncover made clear that this was not a spontaneous act of violence. It was a crime that had been planned, documented, and carried out deliberately. This is the case of Kelly Coppola and the events that led to her death. Kelly Coppola lived in St. James, a suburban community in Suffolk County, New York. By the summer of 2024, Kelly Coppola was 50 years old at the time of her death. She was a mother first, deeply involved in her child's lives, and focused on maintaining consistency despite the changes divorce had brought. Friends and family later described her as practical and committed to doing what was best for her child, even when it meant navigating difficult boundaries with her former spouse. Her marriage to Daniel Coppola had ended, but their separation did not eliminate contact. Like many divorced parents, they shared custody of their child, which required continued communication and coordination. That connection, while necessary, also meant that the emotional separation was not always clean or simple. However, according to prosecutors, the relationship between Daniel and Kelly had deteriorated significantly following the divorce. There is no public indication that Kelly believed she was in danger. There were no reported restraining orders in place at the time of the killings, and no public record of imminent threats. To the outside world, the situation appeared stable, even if emotionally complex. Court records and statements made by investigators indicate that Daniel Coppola harbored ongoing resentment related to the end of the marriage. While Kelly moved on, prosecutors say Daniel became increasingly consumed by anger and fixation. What no one outside law enforcement knew at the time was that Daniel Coppola had begun planning violence. On the day of the murders, Daniel Coppola was with his teenage daughter, moving through what initially appeared to be an ordinary moment. At some point, the two drove to Kelly Coppola's home in St. James. The location was familiar to the child. She had been there before, and nothing about the drive or the setting immediately suggested that something violent was about to unfold. According to authorities, once they arrived, Daniel sent a text message instructing his daughter to exit the vehicle and wait outside. She followed his instructions without resistance, remaining in the car as directed. At the time, she had no reason to believe the request was anything more than a routine decision by her father. Prosecutors later emphasized that this action was not incidental or spontaneous. They allege that Daniel deliberately positioned his daughter outside the home before entering, ensuring she would not be inside during the shootings while still remaining close by. Investigators believe this step reflects forethought rather than impulse. Daniel then approached the front door of the house. Police say he fired a gun through the door lock to gain entry. This detail is significant as it demonstrates forced entry and intentional action. There was no confrontation at the door and no attempt to enter peacefully or announce his presence. After breaching the door, Daniel went inside the home. Kelly Coppola and her boyfriend, Kenneth Pohlman Jr., were upstairs at the time. Both were shot and killed. Investigators have not publicly detailed the exact sequence of shots inside the house, but authorities confirmed that both the victims were pronounced dead at the scene from gun-hot wounds. After the shootings, Daniel Coppola exited the house and returned to the car where his teenage daughter had been waiting, leaving her in a state of shock and confusion. He got behind the wheel and drove away from the scene, leaving the victims inside the home, their lives tragically cut short. Rather than fleeing a long distance or attempting to evade authorities immediately, Daniel drove to his own nearby residence, a decision that would soon bring law enforcement directly into the situation. Prosecutors later stated that once he arrived at the residence, Daniel threatened to take his own life, prompting additional concern for the safety of both himself and his daughter. The tension escalated further when his daughter contacted emergency services and reported the events she had witnessed. Police responded quickly to the call, arriving at the residence and taking Daniel into custody without further violence or resistance. The weapon used in the shootings was secured by authorities as part of the ongoing investigation. Officers then returned to Kelly Coppola's home in St. James, where they discovered Kelly Coppola and Kenneth Pohlman Jr., deceased from gunshot wounds. Both victims were pronounced dead at the scene. The home was immediately secured, and the area was processed carefully by investigators, treating it as a double homicide and collecting evidence to understand the full scope of the crime. As investigators continued their work, evidence recovered from Daniel Coppola's residence shifted the case from a domestic shooting to one of clear premeditation. What initially appeared to be an act of extreme violence, rooted in a personal dispute, took on a more deliberate and calculated dimension. Police discovered a typewritten document at Daniel's home. According to the Suffolk County District Attorney, the document outlined Daniel's plan in significant detail. Prosecutors described the writing as a blueprint for the crime, not a collection of stray thoughts or emotional outbursts. It allegedly included specific names and references connected to Daniel's divorce, as well as details suggesting he had contemplated multiple acts of violence beyond the shootings themselves. Authorities emphasized that the document was not written impulsively or in the heat of the moment. Instead, it was prepared ahead of time and reflected careful consideration and advanced planning. This discovery became central to the prosecution's case, establishing that the killings were planned in advance and undermining any claim of sudden emotional loss of control. Daniel Coppola was formally charged with 2 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of Kelly Coppola and Kenneth Pohlman Jr. At his arraignment, he entered a plea of not guilty to all charges. During the court proceedings, his defense attorney requested that Daniel be placed on suicide watch, citing concerns about his mental and emotional state following the arrest. The court granted the request, and Daniel was remanded into custody under heightened supervision. Prosecutors used the arraignment to outline the sequence of events they say led to the killings. They highlighted the presence of Daniel's teenage daughter, emphasizing the decision to leave her outside the home. They also pointed to the forced entry into the residence, the execution-style nature of the killings as alleged by the prosecution, and the typewritten plan recovered from Daniel's home. Together, prosecutors characterized the crime as deliberate, controlled, and intentional, arguing that the evidence reflected planning rather than a sudden or emotionally driven act. As details of the case emerged, the community reacted with shock and disbelief. Neighbors described the St. James area as quiet, residential, and family-oriented, a place where violent crime was rare. Many said they could not recall any prior disturbances connected to the home or the people who lived there. Kelly Coppola and Kenneth Pohlman Jr. were not known to be involved in conflicts, arguments, or ongoing disputes. To those around them, the violence appeared sudden only because the planning had taken place privately, out of public view. friends and loved ones of the victims spoke publicly about the loss, sharing memories that painted a picture of two people focused on family in the future. Kelly was remembered as resilient and deeply protective of her children, someone who had endured challenges but remained committed to providing stability and care. Kenneth was described as a devoted partner and father, known for his kindness and optimism, and for his belief that better days were ahead. In the days following the killings, fundraisers were established to support the children affected by the tragedy, reflecting an outpouring of community support and collective grief. At the same time, attention turned to the broader implications of the case. Prosecutors and advocates pointed to the dangers associated with post-divorce domestic violence. They emphasized that separation does not always end risk, particularly when one party remains emotionally volatile and unable to relinquish control, underscoring the need for continued awareness and intervention. Investigators also addressed the role of the teenage daughter in the case, acknowledging her presence at a critical moment in the events that unfolded. Authorities were careful to emphasize that she was not involved in the crime in any way and bore no responsibility for the actions of her father. Instead, they described her as a victim of circumstance, placed in an impossible and frightening situation by a parent's deliberate choices. Her presence outside the house, following her father's instructions to remain in the car, became one of the most troubling aspects of the case. Prosecutors argue that this decision reflected Daniel Coppola's full awareness of what he was about to do and his intention to manage who would witness the crime. By positioning his daughter outside, he ensured she would not be harmed directly while remaining nearby, highlighting the calculated nature of the act and the disturbing planning behind it. While authorities have not publicly released detailed information about the psychological impact on the child, they have acknowledged that the trauma is severe and long-lasting. Experts in similar cases note that witnessing or being indirectly involved in violent acts perpetrated by a parent can result in complex emotional and psychological consequences. Support systems, including family counseling and trauma-informed care, are typically critical for helping children in these circumstances begin to process the event and begin healing from the shock and fear imposed up on them by someone they should be able to trust. As the legal process continues, Daniel Coppola remains in custody, held on 2 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of Kelly Coppola and Kenneth Pohlman Jr. He is being detained while the case moves through the court system, with prosecutors preparing to present their evidence in full. Prosecutors have stated that they intend to pursue the strongest possible case, relying on the totality of the evidence collected during the investigation, including physical evidence, witness statements, and digital records. Central to their argument is the typewritten plan recovered from Daniel's home, which prosecutors say outlines the crime in advance. When combined with the detailed sequence of actions he allegedly took on the day of the killings, investigators argue the evidence shows coordination rather than spontaneity. Together, these elements form the foundation of the prosecution's claim that the murders were premeditated, deliberate, and carried out with intent, rather than the result of a sudden emotional reaction. No trial date has been publicly finalized as of the latest reports, leaving the case in a state of ongoing legal proceedings. Court officials, attorneys, and law enforcement continue to prepare for a trial that could last months, as both sides gather evidence, interview witnesses, and present legal arguments. For the families of Kelly Coppola and Kenneth Pohlman Jr., the case represents an irreversible and profound loss. The legal process cannot undo the violence or restore the lives taken, but it may provide a measure of accountability and clarity. In the broader context, the case has also raised awareness about post-divorce domestic violence, the importance of preventive measures, and the lasting impact that violent acts can have on surviving family members, especially children who are caught in the crossfire of tragic events. While prosecutors have laid out a clear theory regarding the events leading to the deaths of Kelly Coppola and Kenneth Pohlman Jr., many details remain reserved for trial. Authorities have not publicly released every piece of evidence, and certain aspects of the case are still under investigation. As a result, questions remain unanswered for the public, leaving a mix of known facts and uncertainties that shape the narrative of this tragic incident. What is clear, however, is that Kelly Coppola did not die as the result of a random act of violence. The person accused of killing her was someone she knew intimately, her ex-husband, Daniel Coppola, someone who had been part of her life for many years. This fact underscores the disturbing nature of domestic violence cases, where danger can come not from strangers, but from familiar people who were once trusted and deeply connected. Cases like this challenge common assumptions about safety after separation. Divorce or separation does not always sever emotional ties or power dynamics. In some situations, it can intensify them, especially when anger, resentment, or a desire for control persist. Investigators and prosecutors frequently point out that the period immediately following separation can be one of the most dangerous times for those involved, as unresolved conflict and emotional volatility increase the risk of harm. Kelly Coppola's case reflects this reality in stark terms. It illustrates how familiarity and routine can mask risk, providing cover for premeditated intent that might otherwise go unnoticed. The presence of her teenage daughter outside the home further emphasizes the calculated nature of the crime and the devastating impact it had on those left behind. Kenneth Pohlman Jr. also became a victim of circumstances that were not of his own making. His death highlights how unresolved conflict and deep-seated grievances can extend beyond their original boundaries, ensnaring others who may have no connection to the underlying dispute. Ultimately, the case serves as a tragic reminder of the dangers that can persist long after a relationship has formally ended. It underscores the importance of vigilance, awareness, and legal safeguards to protect those who remain at risk, even when separation seems to signal the end of conflict. Kelly Coppola was a mother working to rebuild her life. Kenneth Pohlman Jr. was a man who became part of that new chapter. Their deaths were not the result of chance, but of decisions made by someone who remained anchored to the past. This case is not only about what happened inside a home on Brasswood Road. It is about how unresolved control can turn deadly, how ordinary routines can be used to conceal intent, and how violence does not always announce itself before it arrives. If stories like Kelly's matter to you, stay with us. Share her story. Subscribe for more true crime documentaries, because awareness and conversation are what help prevent tragedies like this from being ignored.